Welcome back to Inside Update, where every other week we are catching up about headlines across Connecticut. This show is brought to you by InsideInvestigator.org. We are a nonprofit newsroom focused on rooting out corruption in Connecticut through investigative journalism. And speaking of investigative journalism, two things you need to know about today. I am joined by Mark E. Fitch and Catherine Revelo to talk about their two latest investigations, Religion and Redactions. Catherine, we're going to jump into that one first and chat about some of your adventures, misadventures might be a better phrase, for getting information. And then we're going to talk about Hidden Hand, deals with the state contracting board. Mark has the details there. Catherine, you have kind of been through the ringer here over the last couple of weeks with information transparency. Tell us a little bit about this investigation.
Yeah, so it's a little more than a few weeks, Connor. This is actually over 8 months that this FOIA has been pending with the Department of Corrections. So this was an investigation that started off with wanting to take a look at an interstate corrections compact that Connecticut is a part of. It's Connecticut and every other state, plus the District of Columbia and a couple of U.S. territories, where basically the compact allows for prisoners to be transferred into and out of states. And ideally, it's meant to be if a state is having an issue housing a prisoner for whatever reason, they can send them to another state where maybe they might have, a better chance at thriving, at being in general population if they're in a more restricted housing. And part of the terms of the contract, these transfers are really only supposed to happen um, if it's in the best interest of the prisoner. So if, their family is located in another state, if, they have job opportunities in another state, that's that sort of thing. So this is not just the state of Connecticut can send prisoners, away for because they find them annoying or whatever. But there, what we really wanted to investigate was whether this is actually being abused. And, as we've run into issues before, the Department of Corrections, we submitted a Freedom of Information Act request to try to get records on prisoner transfers. We tried to get historical data. We were told that the Department of Corrections does not collect that data that way. So we could only get records for prisoners who were in the Connecticut prison system on the actual day that we submitted the request. So limitation number one on the investigation. Limitation number two was actions for some of the files that were eventually turned over because again, this request is still pending as of this day. That again really hampered the investigation. Pretty much all identifying information was taken out of involuntary transfer requests, which, obviously if we're looking for abuses in this program, it's going to be in the involuntary transfers that they're occurring. We were able to, by working with his attorney, we were able to tell the story of Kevin Harris, who is one of these prisoners who was transferred. He's currently in Arizona, where his attorney cannot get in touch with him because he's on a mental health watch, which is different than in Connecticut, where his family, his attorney would be able to talk to him. So we don't know what the status of Kevin Harris is right now. We have some evidence that he was transferred out of Arizona, not for his own good, but because he is a prisoner who's stood up for his civil rights. He's had a long and complicated disciplinary history in the prison, but he's also a member of a minority religious group, which is known as the Five Percenters, that was not recognized as a religious group in Connecticut prisons until recently. Harris was part of a lawsuit that attempted to make DOC recognize that this is a religion and that these prisoners have religious rights. And so he may have been transferred for retaliatory reasons. Again, he was involved in other lawsuits where, we've seen evidence that he was mistreated. Some of the prison guards, mocked him because of religious requirements, and that type of thing. So, kind of definitely troubling stuff. Definitely not a lot of evidence that he was transferred for his own good. And another one of the things that I want to highlight in, sort of the way DOC has handled this is we were told that we couldn't get identifying information on involuntary transfer requests for prisoner safety. Now, before we told this story, when we were working with Kevin Harris's attorney, I asked him, hey, DOC has said that they don't want the public to know where he is for his own safety. Obviously, if there's some sort of misconduct here, we want to expose that, but we also don't want to do it in a way that's going to actually impact safety of inmates. And his response was, basically sunshine is the best disinfectant here. Like there is absolutely no reason why his location should be hidden from the public, and that the best thing that can be done for him is to be in an environment where he has the support of family, he has the support of whoever else, and that this transfer hasn't done that. And so this is a story that the public needs to know.
It's super frustrating to run into this situation. I think, we get that discussion pretty frequently internally because you get into an investigation, you have to wonder, listen, do we only publish this if we can, find the smoking gun, if we can really explain every single thing that's going on? And where we have landed on this, at least, and I think what both of you have managed to navigate so well is raising the questions, right? Our job isn't to be the judge and jury here, but it's certainly to draw attention to these things. I mean, the Arizona bit was particularly frustrating. I know you brought this up in the last section of the article, but just the state prison findings in Arizona where this guy was transferred to, not only do they in statute not have to provide him with the accommodations that he had in Connecticut, but I think the judge said, quote, there's an unconstitutional substantial risk of serious harm, which just for me raises flags and red lights. I mean, it does. I don't know. You know how I am about optimistic silver lining stories, but I really found myself frustrated at the end of this. I can only imagine that your transparency fight didn't leave you with a great feeling in your stomach either.
Yeah, and I'll say this too, Catherine, is, before you dived into this subject, I had, poked around with it about a year ago or so. And the people who I have found who had been transferred, at least the names that I was able to get, a lot of them had, lawsuits. A lot of them had, religious issues that were the subject of those lawsuits. And then they find themselves kind of whisked away in their own best interest. And I've generally found that when somebody says it's, we're doing such and such in the best interest of, it's generally not, it's in the best interest of someone, but not the person they're talking about.
Right, absolutely. And, I feel like often in these situations, the prisoners who supposedly it's their best interest that they have in mind are the ones that don't have a voice, which is hopefully something that, this investigation was trying to look at and correct. And I'll say this too, right? Mark, you just alluded to the fact that we've been working on this for over a year. We've had this tip pending, and since I've been working on it, we pushed back publication on this multiple times because DOC was just not complying with FOIA, and without that information, it kind of hampers our story until we get to the point where we feel like this has been such a difficult time trying to get this information out that becomes a part of this story. Ideally, our FOI issues are not something that we want to be the focus of our investigative work, but when it becomes a major issue of the story, I think we're absolutely gonna focus on that, and I think that's a huge part of accountability journalism.
Well,
Absolutely.
I'll see your 8 month wait on the FOI and raise it to a year and a half. DECD, if you're listening, I'm still waiting.
We have a stack, right? I mean, we have a channel internally where we track our FOIA requests, and it's a joke at this point in many ways. I mean, just waiting is really a brutal game, especially when, the job is transparency, the job is helping inform and educate. These are the folks who are supposed to be providing this information in a timely way. It's really
And
tough.
and I think that's something our readers and tipsters should know too, because sometimes I'll get a tip and they're like, "Oh, just go FOI it." I
Yeah.
say, "Okay, I mean, do you want the story to come out next year? I mean, like, do you have the information? If you have it, give it to me, because if you're telling me to FOI it, then, don't hold your breath."
I
Right.
love planning stories out months ahead of time, but that is like the worst reason to do that is just because we know that we're to anticipate roadblocks is pretty brutal. Um, Catherine, just one more thing too about that the idea of helping prisoners, right? I mean, I think a lot of what your article here alluded to, but also a lot of our coverage of issues in prisons is the idea of how do we get people who have done horrible things or are on the path to restoring their lives and being able to re-enter society. I guess I'm not even sure what the question is here, but it seems like there are just barriers upon barriers to that in the system to the point where we can't even get data on abuses that these people are dealing with. I mean, there's another FOIA request that we're just kind of stuck sitting on. Again, I can't request how many people have been physically abused by corrections officers, for example. I mean, we're kind of just stuck in the dark for the time being, and that's what we have to draw attention to if we want any of these investigations to move forward, right?
Yeah, I think that's the really frustrating thing. And again, Kevin Harris's attorney provided us with a lot of documentation where, when documents were provided to us with FOI and were heavily redacted with, basically all of the information we wanted to know. Fortunately, he had copies of that information. So we were able to kind of fill in some of the missing pieces. But, outside of tipsters, outside of people who are kind of willing to come forward and hopefully provide us with documentation, yeah, we're absolutely stuck with a lot of the stuff. DOC understand, that a lot of this, is sensitive information, but it's kind of hard to know and when they're applying redactions and review correctly and when they're not, so yeah, it's absolutely frustrating. Connor, you just alluded to the fact that we have had more FOIs we wanted to submit to DOC, and there are more avenues of information that they just don't collect data on. And it's, stuff that is basic oversight, for instance, like allegations of abuse by DOC employees in prison. And without that information, it's just really difficult to understand what's going on.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. Uh, Man, okay. I feel like again, we could go on about this for a really long time. We try to keep these episodes to a manageable time. I'll say this before we jump into Hidden Hand. Mark's investigation is we want this show to be helpful to you as someone who listens in the state of Connecticut, cares about what's going on, wants to be informed and educated. Is 20 minutes the right time for you? Is it 10 minutes? Do you want, I don't think the TikTok 5-second clip is going to do this level of investigative work justice. But we're trying to play around with what the best way to discuss this is. And if you have thoughts about that, please email info@insideinvestigator.org. We love feedback on all aspects of our business, but especially on newer projects and products like Inside Update, where we have the wiggle room to figure out what is best for readers. So please let us know. Brief interlude aside, Mark, let's talk about the state contracting board and this conflict with the executive director. Another instance where, man, maybe some differences of opinions really bubbling up to the top here and hitting the public eye.
Well, it's differences of opinions, and it's also just kind of strange. So, the State Contracting and Standards Board is this small board of political appointees. Probably half are appointed by the governor, the rest by majority and minority leaders. But this board was developed following John Rowland's contracting scandal that landed him in prison. And this board is actually, I mean, they are small. They are made up of a lot of, former labor leaders and people with contract expertise. And labor leaders are very good at contracts. Um, but they actually are very powerful. They have oversight and can investigate at will any contract entered into by the executive branch of the government. And frankly, they can cancel those contracts if they found that they were done illegally or didn't meet certain requirements or things like that. So they are they are small and quiet, but very powerful in certain ways. And because they're very powerful, governors have essentially kneecapped them since the beginning. They were supposed to have funding for a full staff. I mean, this board began in 2009, I think, 2010. They were supposed to have funding for a full staff. They didn't get that until 2022. So they've been operating for more than 10 years with just the board members themselves doing all the work that a staff would normally do and an executive director. So they finally got a full staff. They have an executive director who's appointed by the Lamont administration. His name is Greg Daniels. But here's the problem. The State Contracting Standards Board investigated the state pier and the Connecticut Port Authority a few years ago. And this apparently got under the skin of the Lamont administration and the budget writing people. And they have been essentially trying to kneecap this board ever since. And the legislature kind of, made sure that the board finally got funding, and that was all good, except, now we've gotten to the situation where the chairman of the board, Michael Walsh, he started in December of 2023, and he left in February of 2024. After he left, director board member, they could no longer have their meetings because there wasn't a chairman. The chairman has to be appointed by the governor. This flies in the face of past practice. So usually when they were without a chairman, they would just elect an interim chairman until the governor made his appointment. This happened as recently as September of 2023 when Greg Daniels was the executive director, and there was no problem then. But all of a sudden, February comes along, Michael Walsh leaves, and the executive director says, you cannot meet anymore. And this really got under the skin of the board members. And so, we have lots of emails back and forths, and basically, I spoke with current board members. I spoke with past executive directors and past chairmen, trying to figure out, hey, what's going on here? What's the problem? And everybody kind of saw this as, you know what question was asked to me multiple times? How do you kill a board? How do you kill a board? And so a lot of them saw this as a method to pretty much, kneecap this board and keep them from doing what they're supposed to do under statute. Even with their full staff, they can't get anything done. And there's a clock on some of these issues that they have to make. They have to make rulings within a specific time period. And so Greg Daniels canceled their March meeting, their April meeting, their May meeting. The Lamont administration did not return our request for comment or say if they're even considering somebody for the chairman position. Interestingly, one of their longtime founding board members, this guy Robert Rinker, the board has 14 positions. Only 13 of them were full. There's been a long time outstanding vacancy. I mean, since before Lamont was even governor. So it was just this past, it was, I think, February. February 2024 again. Lamont and Bob Rinker was a bit of an outspoken person, even though he was a governor appointee. But Lamont got rid of him. I mean, unceremoniously too. It was just like, hey, you're gone. And replaced him with another labor leader, which, okay, fine. But if he had taken that same guy, Keith Brothers, and used him to fill the open vacancy, they would have had their full board. Instead, he gets rid of the guy who's been a little too outspoken and replaces him, and now there's still a vacancy on the board. And to go even a little further with this, kind of lost my train of thought. Greg Daniels, after canceling the regular meetings, schedules on his own a special meeting so that the board can have ethics training. Only two board members show up, meaning there's not a quorum. Okay, so it can't be an officially held meeting. He marks it down as an officially held meeting anyway, posts the meeting minutes and the agenda and all this kind of stuff. And one of the interesting points that was made to me was that if he doesn't want the board to meet, that he can't allow a regular meeting, because a regular meeting, they can vote 2/3 majority to amend their agenda, elect a interim chairman onto that agenda, do it, and have it be done. You can't do that with a special meeting. With a special meeting, you have to stick to the agenda. You can't alter it. So at this point, if you truly don't want an interim chairman being appointed, you can't allow a regular meeting. You can only allow special meetings. But even this special meeting was essentially like, it shouldn't have even been recorded as a meeting. Nobody was there. So, and when I tell you it's gotten a little heated behind the scenes, it's gotten a little heated behind the scenes. And so there's a lot of accusations of, you know, authoritative overreach, the administration trying to kneecap them, and just general, like, we don't like each other back and forth at this point. It's gotten a little rough over there. And it's a shame, because this is a board that has fought to have staffing and funding for over a decade. And now that they have it, it's essentially being used against them.
Right. I guess if there's one organization that you really want to make sure is full up, is the accountability and transparency board that can really help you out. I know we're coming up. I think we're a little over that 20-minute mark that we're shooting for, but I want to just have you clarify. You had written a follow-up article mentioning this about the $1 million that lawmakers want to study state contracting, which you point out the timing here is a little odd. Hey, we need a whole nother $1 million. This could be done by the board that already exists by simply letting them do their job. Do you have more to add on that?
No, but yeah, it's basically, and this was the Appropriations Committee did this. It wasn't even like the Office of Policy and Management's idea, because they don't want to do it. So yeah, the legislature was basically like, we're going to force you to spend about $1 million on an outside consultant to study what's going wrong with contracting in the state, that some of our nonprofits aren't getting paid on time. Well, that's literally the entire, job of the State Contracting Standards Board, is to study state contracting and make recommendations. They've done it in the past. They continue to do it. But I guess if you're not allowed to meet and figure all this stuff out, that's not going to happen.
At a cost of $450,000 for the board,
as opposed to 1 million,
950 just to do the study, let alone implement the darn thing and actually make sure that there are fixes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's another good excuse to use an outside consultant.
For sure. And both of these, well written. I know, like, I really enjoy talking to you guys about it, because I feel like I get, Mark, it's fun to hear the emotion come out of that, of like, I feel like I'm taking crazy pills, but at the same time, like, your talent in terms of telling this story, it's a great read. So all that to, push people listening to actually go read the thing, because, this, I feel like the talking about it is just the tip of the iceberg on both of these investigations. Do either of you have anything else to touch on before we wrap up? I know, obviously, our perennial call for tips and good information. Please don't tell us to just go FOIA it, I guess, is maybe a key takeaway here as well. Anything else from either of you before we wrap up?
Just not if you want it in the next year. That's all I know.
Very fair. Excellent. Well, huge thank you. Appreciate both of you so much. And thank you to all of you who watch, read, and listen. We will be back in 2 weeks. And until then, be well, stay safe, and stay informed.